Clarence and Lilly Pickett were in my mind, some of the most important people for the Religious Society of Friends, particularly Clarence Pickett, who was one of the earliest leaders of the American Friends Service Committee. He was one of the people who really brought together Friends across the spectrum, across the different traditions, in service to being a prophetic voice for peace and justice in the world.
Clarence and Lilly Pickett were people who lived at the early part of the 20th century, into the middle of the 20th century, and they were Quakers. They were Quakers from the Midwest. They were profoundly influential in the history of Quakerism, in the history of the world in the 20th century, I would say. They followed a leading, and it had a really big impact on Quaker institutions and the development of Quakerism as we know it today.
They were big characters, I think, and they left a big legacy. Clarence was a pastor. He worked in a number of different avenues in life. He's most known for his service as the General Secretary of American Friends Service Committee, particularly during the post-World War II period.
The American Friends Service Committee was founded after the World War I for the conscientious objectors, particularly, who had refused to have military service. And the government did accept the idea that they could do civilian public service instead.
So that many young adult Quakers who did not feel led to participate in the military, but who very much wanted to help their society and improve the world, were able to participate in these activities with each other that had a really meaningful effect, not just on the world, but on themselves.
Yeah, I think that Clarence Pickett, in the times that he was living through, in the times that he led AFSC, I think he saw a need to create experiences for young adults, and particularly for young adult Friends at that time, to do a number of things, including be of service in the world, live useful lives that were contributing to bringing about a more just and peaceful world than what they were experiencing and seeing around them. And also to have an opportunity to do that self-reflective work with other like-minded people.
And so we had a generation of change agents who grew up saying, I can change the world because I've done it. I remember doing it when I was a young adult, and they had a cadre of each other to lean on, and as they went through their lives, they remembered, yes, I have power, and I have the capacity to connect with other people, and together we can change the world. Well, that's an incredible legacy. That's a legacy that resonates today, because there are young people growing up today who begin to see that, and we need to help water those seeds, because this is a world in need of change. This is a world in need of justice. This is a world in need of divine grace.
The Picketts, both Clarence and Lilly, had developed relationships with people like Eleanor Roosevelt, with various administrations, Truman, etc. So Clarence ended up taking AFSC from being, I think, what was a much smaller organization at that time, with a smaller mission in the world, to the global stage of humanitarian work, and was really responsible for growing a lot of the relief efforts that helped feed millions of children and help many people recover from the wars.
My grandparents, Clarence Pickett, was the head of American Friends Service Committee for many years, during which time, under his leadership, the organization did win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947. My grandparents were good friends with Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt, and so there were a number of mementos in their house. My parents received gifts from them, letters from them, which I actually have today. When I was in the early 1950s, I would think, or mid-50s, I accompanied my grandparents to the Friends General Conference in Cape May, and at that time, I got to meet Martin Luther King. He was going to be a speaker, and my grandparents had him over for dinner, and I got to participate in that, and that was really just at the beginning of the momentum for the civil rights movement. He was probably the one person that I met that over time I realized the depth of my grandfather's connections and the work that he was doing both nationally and internationally.
My name is Patricia Hunt. I was born in 1920, so I'm 99, and I came to know Clarence and Lilly Pickett in 1941. Clarence, from that moment, seemed to want to, I was, 20, took me under his wing, and I've often said I walked in the front door of the American Friends Service Committee, because at that point I was not a Quaker. I had never heard of what Quakers did, and what better mentor than a man of that quality and the family of that quality.
Wilmer Josem used to say that Clarence Pickett would look across the room and he'd see somebody and he'd say, that person's going to be a leader. And then he would find a way to nurture and support that person to follow the leadings that they had.
My grandfather really enjoyed mentoring young people with all the experience, and so even as he was retired, spent a great deal of time with people that would come and ask for advice, ask for mentoring, and try to show them a path to social service work that might be meaningful.
Later on, as I checked in whenever I was back in Philadelphia, I would drop in and see Clarence and let him know where I was on my work plans, and it was a lovely feeling of somebody paying attention and supporting me.
So after Clarence and Lilly finished their lives, there were quite a few people who recognized that their legacy was powerful, inspirational, and enduring, and they wanted to make sure that it kept on enduring. And they founded the Pickett Endowment Fund precisely to honor their understanding of the legacy of the Pickett's lives. So the Pickett Endowment Fund was an opportunity to invite people of that generation, especially, who had participated in the work camps or who were affected by other people who had participated in the work of the service committee in the 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, to help them have an opportunity to touch eternity, to say, you can be part of something that will continue the legacy of the Pickett's work going forward. And so the Pickett Endowment Fund has seen itself as the stewards of this important legacy. And so we have been very careful and conservative about taking care of our endowed funds to make small grants to emerging young adult Quaker leaders as we understand them.
When I look at the long list of people who have received grants from the Pickett Endowment, I see the names of many of my friends and peers and colleagues who were supported at a time in our lives when there weren't many other opportunities for support in the Quaker context to say, we believe in you as a young adult friend and we're investing in your leadership development. So many of the people, as I was growing up, who I looked to as my elders and inspiration, people who were not only leading the Quaker community, but leading organizations in the wider community, many of them had been formed and shaped by experiences of Quaker service and community when they were young adults. Many of them would point to stories in their young adult lives that transformed them and put them on the path that they were on for the rest of their lives. So I think when we support young adults, we're not only investing in their experience in the short term, but we're really investing in the future of the Religious Society of Friends and then, of course, of the world.
So that's something anybody can do in meeting. I can and should do that for other younger people in my meeting. Others people still do that for me. All of our meetings can be doing it. All of our Quaker bodies can be finding ways to nurture young leaders to do this kind of work.